Movie trailers are really great analogies for introductory paragraphs, partly because you can't make a trailer until you've made the movie. And the same logic really should apply to our introductions. If you've ever had this experience as a writer where the introduction is brutal and you stare at the blinking cursor for a long time, and then once you finally get through that paragraph, things start to move a little bit better, then you've experienced an issue with process, right? Probably better to do these introductions a little bit later once we know what we've got to say, because that's really what introductions are there to do. They're there to tell the reader the topic, and the topic might not kind of become clear to us until we're a little bit of the ways into the writing. And then we need a main idea about that topic. That's really all an introduction has to do, is reveal these two pieces of information. But as they do so, they tend to reveal other things like the genre. From by the time you've gotten through the introduction, you should have a sense of whether you're reading a lab report or, kind of a personal blog or something that's trying to persuade, and so on. And we also should have a sense of the tone, what kind of relationship the writer seems to think he or she has with us. Uh, so here is the sort of information we can expect to get from an introduction, but also really they have another purpose, and that is to convince the reader to keep reading. I mean, think about it. Have you ever gone to like a website with lots of different articles on it, or picked up a magazine that's full of articles? You don't read them all. You probably look at the introduction and make a decision about which ones you want to invest more time in. From an assessment purpose, I can tell you that a lot of times, teachers or hiring managers make up their minds about students or applicants really just by looking at the introduction of their essay or personal statement. So, introductions are pretty critical in that sense. We need to sort of draw readers in. We can do that through showing that there's some sort of a conversation. There's a complex issue here with different sides and different perspectives, and readers might want to read on to think about how they feel about it. They might want to take part in the debate. Another great way to convince people to read is to give them the sense that they're going to learn things if they do. Let's look at how different styles of introductions can execute this. There's so many pieces of writing in this world, but really they tend to have 6 basic types of introductions here, which we can try to represent with these icons. One we'll call a they say, I say style introduction. You've seen examples of this already if you've done the organizational frameworks module. But another example is right here. This is an introduction that students tend to find very effective. This is one of the most popular introductions in that exercise when students evaluate them. But it's a classic example of a they say, I say. There's really 2 perspectives on something here. Here you get the first perspective. This is the perspective of evolutionary psychologists. The other people, someone other than the writer. And they've got this, here's what they're saying. And then we get this turning point here, the but, and now we see what the writer wants to say, I say, right? So really, these are the key features of this type of introduction. There's some sort of reporting phrase, they say, or they have long claimed, or many people believe, or a popular saying goes that. Then you get your turning point, and then you get some sort of a contrasting opinion on the topic. The other type of introduction that students tend to find highly effective is the story anecdote approach. It's demonstrated by this triangle because the key thing is that we go from somewhat narrow to more specific. Let's take a look. Here's an example of it. Introduction D. Why this is really about men and women, right? In general, why men and women get married. But before we hear about men and women in general, we're going to hear about one couple, right? We get Jamie Wilson and Jonathan Heinlein here. And we get this nice, richly told story about them, full of concrete detail. And this brings the story to life in the reader's minds. It's relatable, right? Much more relatable than a sentence like this, which is so broad and abstract, lacks some of that appeal. You see this type of introduction all the time in journalism because it's a great example of qualitative evidence. Take a look at that qualitative module for more on how journalists and other experienced writers use qualitative data. Let's look at the other type of introduction that students generally agree is effective. That's the surprising fact. An example of it is here with Miller and Kanazawa. Now, students in this class at some point start to distrust Miller and Kanazawa and have concerns about their argument here, but they generally agree that despite those concerns, the writing is effective. And here's an example of a surprising fact introduction that a lot of readers do feel is effective. They tell readers something that is with the implication that most people don't know this. And this creates the sense for the reader that if you continue with this text, you will learn new things. So the key to writing this type of introduction is to think like you're making a movie trailer, right? When we get the trailers for these movies, this movie has a lot of different scenes, but a few of them are quite exciting. Those are the scenes that we see in the trailer, right? This movie has a lot of jokes. Some of them are probably pretty bad, but they pick a few that they think are good, and they put those in the introduction. So this creates in the trailer. So this creates the sense for the viewer that you're going to be excited or amused. Well, we can do that with our writing. We can take, one of our most interesting facts and put it in the introduction as sort of a teaser to the reader. Keep reading to learn more cool things like this. Here are the 3 introductions that students generally find most effective. Now let's look at the type of introduction that most American high school students are taught to write. That's the funnel. Here, the triangle is inverted because now we're going from general to more specific. All right, and it's demonstrated by this introduction, Introduction F. This is really about attractive avatars in digital games, but before we get into talking about games with avatars, look how we go really, really broad. Digital online technologies. And then we start to narrow down to digital online games. And then we start to move into the idea of the communities within those games and the users. And then we finally start walking towards main idea. A way to think about the funnel is that first you show people the topic, and then you just take steps towards main idea. You can think of it like an apple. The apple is the topic. The core of the apple is the main idea, and each sentence should take off a chunk on it. Like beauty. Well, what is beauty? It involves many different features, and these features might be the result of evolution. That's a funnel, right? Funnels can be short and sweet and effective. The problem you see with inexperienced writers is they go too broad. They take you all the way out to the universe, right? First, there was dust, and then the dust formed planets, and then from the planets we get civilizations, and then technology, and then that led to television. Is television good for education? Maybe not. You went too far out. The topic is television. Why don't you start there? It's worth noting that the writers here are researchers, not professional writers. Okay, and that might be why they're relying on this type of introduction that most people find less effective. All right. Another example of an introduction that people tend to find less effective is the historical background, which you see an example of that in A. All right. Here we're going to learn about, the multiracial facial golden ratio. But first, let's get a history lesson. We're going to go all the way back to ancient Greece and then hear what Filius Bonacci did, and then notice how we're just kind of going through the time periods here, and then this sort of brings this kind of brings the reader back up into the present moment here. These types of introductions are useful sometimes if readers need context. Before I tell you why we need to build the new bridge, you need to learn about the old bridge. But students generally find this to be a less effective introduction. It just doesn't have some of the impact that you get from, say, a surprising fact or a story or an anecdote. It is also worth noting that the 2 introductions that students routinely describe as ineffective are the longest ones, right? F is pretty long. So is A. There's something to be said for keeping things really short and to the point, and that's what this last style of introduction really does. If you take a look at this example here, really, the first sentence, that's what this whole article is about. We often see this type of introduction in journalism as well, especially in things like newspapers, where every word counts because you want to leave as much space as you can for advertising, right? Journalists often have strict word counts that they have to keep, that they have to adhere to, and an easy way to cut out 50 words is to, just not spend time introducing things and just get right to the point. This type of introduction generates a lot of discussion in class. Students generally describe it as effective, but they wonder if there could be a little more lead in. I think this is a useful type of introduction when we have space constraints or where we just don't know how much attention from readers we're really going to have, right? And this leads us to this idea that different type of introductions are really useful for different situations, and you can't just rely on one type. For instance, we can combine these styles quite well. You can tell a story to get readers visualizing what you're talking about, and then do the they say I say to draw them further in. You can do a surprising effect to show readers that you're going to learn from this, and then the they say I say kind of brings them into this conversation. That can work really well in combination. And again, sometimes you just need a particular style, like you need to do the historical background, for instance. And oftentimes when we're doing a variety of pieces of writing, we need to be able to create variety in the introductions. Keep that old quote in mind, that the best style is the style you don't notice. If you always do the same type of introduction, readers are going to